First Person is produced in cooperation with the Far East Broadcasting Company, who rejoice in the stories of changed lives through the power of Jesus Christ. Learn more at febc.org.
It comes down to a discipleship. If we can start to have better conversations by saying, I'm not always going to be here, and I want to raise up the next generation to be able to do this because the kingdom matters, then that's an important conversation to have.
His mission is to guide churches, organizations, and individuals through a transition. You'll meet Matt Davis on this edition of First Person. Welcome, I'm Wayne Shepherd. When a change in leadership becomes necessary, what is the best way to make that transition and help all concerned move on successfully? We'll explore that as we get to know our guest and his ministry calling. First, I'll remind you that if you can't stay with us now for the conversation to come, you can look up our podcast on nearly any of the podcast apps, or you can stream and even download the program at firstpersoninterview.com. Just about everyone experiences a season of change in their life. Churches find it necessary to change pastors, whether it's through retirement or any other reason. Individuals find it necessary to find a new job and or ministry. And that's where our guest, Matt Davis, and the organization Ministry Transitions comes into play. You'll find a link to the ministry at firstpersoninterview.com. Matt is the president and chief pastoral officer, and he joins us now.
We found out that Christians are really good at saying hello, and we're not so good at saying goodbye. And so we work with organizations and individuals inside of those organizations in their season of change, their season of transition. And how do we answer this question of what's next in our life? And those are usually some sort of inflection point where we start to question everything. What am I here for? What am I doing with my life? And how did I get here? And so oftentimes it ends up in a bit of a wilderness story, and we're trying to find our way either to the promised land or get me back to Egypt. But we want to be able to walk with people and the organizations that have sent those people into the wilderness. How do we do this better and stop dividing the church in how we say goodbye? There's a better way. And so that's really the emphasis.
Okay, and you work with different scenarios, but for instance, you'll work with a church that needs to work their way through a pastoral transition, whether it's a retirement or a pastor who needs to leave and doesn't know it, or any number of situations, right? Not just related to the church, but to organizations in general.
Yeah, so anywhere where a Christian can derail the process, right? So that includes churches, nonprofits, faith-owned companies, where you have the CEO is a Christian who's trying to figure out, how do I do this well? Missions agencies, even Christian universities, and really those transition points, they start either as an open succession where everybody knows and is aware. Sometimes it starts as a hidden transition where the person is inside the organization saying, get me out, and I'm not sure how to do this. And then sometimes it's blind transition where they don't ever see it coming. The organization knows that it needs to happen, and that person is trying to now figure out, what do I do with my life?
Okay. Well, I want to talk more about that in a few minutes. I don't know anything quite like this that I'm aware of, and it's pretty unique, and I want to learn about it if we can. But I also want to learn about your personal story. You also went through a transition, but it was a different sort of transition, wasn't it?
Yeah. I was an executive pastor, teaching pastor at a church. I'd been there for more than a couple decades. And there's lots of ways to exit, as we just talked about. And I took another path, which is not the preferred path. I had a moral failure. And as a result of that, brought an onslaught of pain and hurt and trauma to myself to begin with. But really the ripple effects hit everybody. My wife, my kids, my good friends, the staff people that worked with me and for me, the church, and those ripple effects kind of keep going out from there. And the story of trying to figure out, well, what does life after ministry look like, has been the journey of the last decade of my life, trying to figure out, all right, Lord, what's next if I'm not doing this pastor thing? What do you have for me?
Yeah.
And that was not an easy journey.
No. First things first, your marriage survived this ordeal?
Yeah, and thankfully, she's a trooper. And we didn't just stay married for the kids, but lots and lots of counseling and intensives. But we're going to hit 25 years of good marriage, of really great marriage, and being intentional about owning our stuff. It's been
wonderful.
Great.
Congratulations on that. So, without detail, you were fully repentant and submitted yourself to some sort of process, I assume?
Yeah, worked through that with the board, and still feel very repentant in that process. But it's even though those were a good group of people who loves me and want the best for me and for the church, that doesn't make any of it easy for any of us.
No.
And so, thankfully, there were people that said, like, you are not here anymore, and it has to be this way because we love you and we want the best for you. And so transitions, I think we probably would have, at any given point, many of us would have taken other pathways or made different decisions, but I'm thankful for the grace and the goodness of them and the Lord in the process.
Well, you did not intend to return to pastoral ministry then?
No, and I still don't.
So what was the in-between time like between that episode of your life and now with ministry transitions?
Have you ever caught a fish and the fish is up on the boat? It's not quite dead. It's just kind of flopping around there. There's a lot of, maybe to stay with the fish term, a lot of floundering for me and trying to figure out what am I going to do? If ministry, this is the question, right? For people who are in ministry, oftentimes what gets them there is this sense of calling. And if you messed up your calling or the thing that you feel like you got called into, you're no longer doing, well, what do you do with the rest of your life? And so it was not pretty. I was not a pleasant human being. In fact, my wife wrote an article calling it Untangling the Fourth Strand. And when you get married, you have 3 strands that are bound together, the passage in Ecclesiastes. But she said, I didn't realize that when I married you, that there's already this other string, this strand that was in there called the ministry strand. And when that started to get pulled out, it really unraveled a lot of things for me, for our marriage, for a lot of things. And I think the process of healing over the last few years has been, what does it look like to heal what's been broken and to repair what's been ruptured?
Maybe I should have started with this, but how did you become a believer in the first place?
I say that I was marinated in it. There's a 19th century theologian, Horace Bushnell, who says that a child should think themselves a Christian and everything and never think anything else. But my parents, my background, I'm a Jewish believer in the Jewish Messiah named Jesus or Yeshua. And so my parents were saved in the Jesus Revolution era. And in fact, my very first church I ever went to was Calvary Chapel of Santa Ana or Costa Mesa, essentially, which was in Santa Ana, and spent the first 2 years of my life there. But I would say that, I had these moments of sanctification and owning my own faith and realizing that the Lord was with me and making decisions all along the way. But really just grew up in it and grew up in a very faithful, I'm a 3rd generation Messianic believer. And so, yeah.
Matt, after this wilderness experience of recovery and working through the issues in your life, you came to work with Ministry Transitions. Now, what do you do with Ministry Transitions?
I co-founded it with a guy named Bill Tom, and Bill spent time in Silicon Valley, was in Fortune 500 companies, helping really as a career coach, executive coach with a lot of these CEOs, trying to figure out what do they do, mergers, acquisitions. But he kept getting ex-pastors coming to him, telling stories that would make Bill cry, and essentially just said, like, why is the church so uniquely struggling in this area? And so he started to find ways of bringing his coaching on the career side of things to these pastors. How do you make that transition really from ministry to the marketplace? And we had a mutual friend who brought us together, and he said, "Hey, I have a vision for really helping ministries and ministry leaders who are in transition. How do we do this better?" And so Bill's the CEO. He calls himself the chief ministry officer, and he calls me the chief pastoral officer. But together we work with organizations and the individuals in those organizations in succession planning and really staffing transitions. And so how do we do this better? If you have to let somebody go, if you are thinking about exiting your organization, there's a better way to do it. And we're walking that through.
Yeah, I've worked in parachurch ministry for my entire adult life, over 50 years now. And I've often asked myself, why does it have to be so difficult at times to see and to be a part of transitions that need to take place? And very often, looking back on them, you can see how God's hand was in it, but it was painful to go through.
Yeah, I think a lot of times we don't really get intentional or granular about building a culture of continuity. We should all be talking about our last day on our first day. What does it look like to, we call it the hit by the bus motif, that, we're not all going to be here. None of us are guaranteed tomorrow. So if I go on a big, long international trip, I want to check in with my wife and family, make sure, hey, if the plane goes down, I want to make sure that you are covered. Well, we don't really always do that very well in our jobs or in our ministries. And so how do we start to have better conversations about that? And really, it comes down to a discipleship. If we can start to have better conversations by saying, I'm not always going to be here, and I want to raise up the next generation to be able to do this because the kingdom matters, then that's an important conversation to have.
We're talking with Matt Davis of Ministry Transitions, and we'll continue the conversation coming up in just a moment.
80 years. That's how long the Far East Broadcasting Company has been faithfully proclaiming the gospel message. I'm Ed Cannon, the president of FEBC, and a partner in bringing you these weekly first-person interviews. My own faith is encouraged by the stories we hear on this program, just as I'm encouraged by the reports from around the world of how God is glorified when His Word goes forth on FEBC. To join us in celebrating the 80th anniversary, listen to our podcast Until All Have Heard, available on any podcast app or at febc.org.
My guest is Matt Davis. Matt is President, Chief Pastoral Officer at Ministry Transitions. They have a website, and we'll put the information in our program notes at firstpersoninterview.com. I want to talk through some of these issues that you work with. You work with both individuals as well as Christian ministries and churches, and describe some of the specifics that you get into with folks.
Sometimes it'll show up in my inbox, and it'll be a pastor that says, I'm done. I had an elder board meeting last night, and I can't do this anymore. So there's dysfunction there. There are sometimes there are ministries that will call and say, we got a surprise confession, or we found something out, and we need to address this, and we're not exactly sure what to do, how to handle this, how do we communicate, and how do you message this from the pulpit? And then sometimes we hired a worship leader and we found out that they can't sing, and we need to have a conversation. What worked for us 10 years ago is not working for us anymore. We still love this person. The church loves this person. How do we move them towards what's next without having them feel cut off? But really, we can help them to feel transplanted. There's something that God has for them in the next season, and there's something that we have for our church or our organization in the next season. And we want to do this well.
Let's zero in on burnout, for instance, in the church. Does this happen very often in your experience?
Yeah, oftentimes. And I would say we're in a little bit of this post-COVID life where you have ministry leaders that long to go back to the days where the things that we fought over were the air conditioning in the sanctuary and the volume of the worship music. I'd say being a leader in ministry these days is exponentially more difficult. We have social issues, we have political issues, we have world issues, and all of these things come down to a leader who has to determine and interpret what does the Word of God say about this. And we have a very divided culture, not just the culture outside of the church, but even the culture within the church. What do we do with some of this? And so, in the political world, we talk about 80-20 rules. Well, there are a lot of different things that, or 80-20 issues that we have some of those in the church that are easier, and there's some that are very divisive and very difficult. And so a lot of these pastors are coming to us saying, I think I just want to go to Home Depot and mix paint for a while. That might be easier.
And let's stick with the church scenario here for a few moments, because you work on behalf of everybody, all the stakeholders, right? You're working with the individual, you're working with the board, I assume, you're working with the congregation.
Yeah, there are a lot of stakeholders in these conversations. Generally, it starts with the board, and they're asking these questions, or an executive pastor, senior pastor. Even lately, working with an executive pastor who knows that it's time for the senior pastor to move on, but how do you have that conversation with them and not have them feel pushed out? Somewhere along the lines, we have to remember this imago Dei that is inherent within each of us, and how do we respect and care for human dignity while also having conversations that are very difficult. And so we walk people through that and say, there's a grace-filled, love-filled approach. And if we're going to be people who are known by our love, it has to be not just in the easy times, but also in these difficult times as well.
Does it always lead to a firing or a transition or a retirement?
Not always. Sometimes people will come to us and they'll say, we need to talk to you about a transition. And we will push back and say, well, before we talk about transition, have you done everything you can to disciple and save this relationship or save this job position? Performance improvement plans, that kind of, because I think sometimes we're not real honest with each other. And I think the part that is the most hurtful is when people are blindsided, that there is this internal friction that's taking place from the organization, but we haven't really brought it up. And so we're going to use the day of their firing to bring it up. And I'd say that that's the worst way to do that. So we are working with groups and say, well, it sounds like you haven't done a great job of preparing them for this moment. Let's see what we can do to redeem and restore first the position, and then secondly, the relationship. And when we can do that, we're going to do something that we call multiply, not divide. And we don't have hats or shirts that say ministry transitions, but we have ones that say multiply, not divide. And that's really our mission, is if we can actually do this well, then we can continue to see the church grow. And if we can prevent when it goes bad, we will hopefully see less and less division in the church.
We've all seen emotions that arise during times like this. How do you address that part of the equation?
Well, part of this, you can have emotions on every side. There could be some contested, heated moments in the boardroom amongst elders or the board trying to figure out what to do. But again, I think it comes down to clear expectations and communications. One of the things that we do with boards is walk them through training and try to anticipate this. If X happens, then we will Y. Now, we can't anticipate absolutely everything, but we start to ask some of these questions that are, I would say, denominationally agnostic. What are the 9 essential questions that every board needs to be asking to prepare? Because sometimes a board member is put in because they have a connection, they have wisdom with something, maybe financial, or they might be able to help move the church in a certain direction. But we need to also be really well connected and understand how the ministry is working, and then what do we want to be able to do to be able to be prepared for some of these moments, and not just in an accountability sense, because I'm not sure that we can keep anybody accountable fully. We can give space for somebody to give an account for their actions. And so we want to be able to, if we can have these conversations before things get heated or emotional, then we're going to operate from a better stature when those moments do come.
Stepping outside the church part of the story here, do you work with organizations, let's say a parachurch ministry, and perhaps the founder or the CEO or president knows that they are reaching the end of their lifespan at the organization. Do you work with boards on succession planning?
Yeah, in the midst of that right now on a couple of different fronts. But sometimes you'll have a founder, somebody who found a ministry and has been doing that for a long time. And you could have, you could think of some of these, right? There are a lot of ministries that have been built around a teaching ministry of somebody or a radio ministry for somebody. And now they're 30, 40 years down the road. And the question becomes, well, what's next? And we're not just looking at this from the perspective of what's next for the organization. I think sometimes we have limited view on there's this other road. There's not just the transition or succession plan for the organization, but what is that person transitioning into for themselves? And so we're looking at these parallel roads of transition, building out a culture of continuity and legacy, and asking those leaders, you might be staying here too long. Let's start to think, what does God have for you in this next season? And help them to take stock, to take aim, and to take steps towards what the Lord has for them in the next season.
Yeah. So you're aiming for a win-win situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the goal every time.
Mm-hmm. I know you're committed to Scripture in this process. By the way, you have a podcast, don't you? Tell me about the podcast.
The podcast is called Life After Ministry. And when I came out of ministry, I thought, well, there is no life now. What am I going to do with myself? And there was really no ministry like Ministry Transitions. The thing that we've built here today is the culmination of the triage that we had to figure out on our own. And so we went to one church to figure out career counseling. I'd never created a resume. I had pizza delivery jobs and working at Subway as a teenager, and then went to school and then became a pastor. So I didn't have a resume. I didn't know what LinkedIn was. I didn't even know what a CRM was. And so I had to figure out career. I needed coaching. I had blind spots and things that needed to get worked on from a heart level and a mind level. And then we all needed counseling. I needed counseling. My wife needed counseling. Our marriage needed counseling. Our kids needed counseling. We needed intensives. And so we just had to piecemeal and pull all of that together, never intending to build a ministry out of this. In fact, I wanted to hide and head for the hills and never talk about this stuff again. And it was the goodness of God, my wife, and Bill approaching me and saying, I think we can actually bring some healing. And the very thing that you lived through that created a lot of pain in your life, you can actually redeem, and God can actually use this in the lives of other people. And so the story of Life After Ministry is, if your last day of vocational ministry is day 0, what do you do on day 1 to start rebuilding your life? And those are the stories that we're telling.
Yeah. I love that part of your story, which is interesting because at one point in your life, this is what you did. You helped people tell their stories, didn't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
How can we pray for you in your ministry, Matt?
Probably more than 50% of the time, the calls that we're getting are after day 0. Our prayer is, Lord, get us to the places where we can find the people who need the help before they need the help, so that next season can be a good one.
You'll find more information about this unique ministry that Matt Davis has described at firstpersoninterview.com. There's a link there in the program notes that can take you to Ministry Transitions. Just remember firstpersoninterview.com. And thanks for your feedback on the program you hear each week. The easiest way to leave a comment is to go to our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/firstpersoninterview. And I want to take a moment to thank the Far East Broadcasting Company for the support which makes First Person possible. FEBC's 80-year-long mission has been to reach the world with the gospel through radio, which has now expanded beyond radio to new forms of media made possible by smartphones, which are so prevalent everywhere in today's world. To catch up on all the exciting developments, visit febc.org. Now, with thanks to my friend and producer Joe Carlson, I'm Wayne Shepherd. Join us next time for First Person.